welcome to another amazing episode of Say It Online, where we help digital agency owners stop just randomly shouting into the void and start communicating meaningfully and effectively in this digital age. I'm your host, Say Gabriel, and this episode was brought to you by our sponsor, Anansi Content. If you're sick of conversion content being a huge pain in your agency's butt, especially websites, campaigns, etc., let's talk. With the smoothest content process ever, a team of unbelievably skilled and organized content strategists, and years of subcontracting experience, Anansi is looking to make your life as a digital agency owner unbelievably easier. Just head, if you're interested, to anansicontent.com, that's ANANSI content.com, and hit Let's Talk. And now, without further ado, here's our episode. So today is an exciting day, which is pretty much every podcast day if you've heard any of these podcasts before. But anyway, today is the first in a brand new series. So now that we've got about 10 to 15 episodes of Say It Online under our belt, possibly more, we've started to look at the data and talk to some listeners. When we were getting going, and this is something that I always recommend for people, we were really involved with this idea that done is the new perfect. And we really just wanted to get into the habit of producing episodes, giving value, etc. But now that we're a ways into it, we're, going back and striving for perfect. So anyway, but what we've heard, or rather we're going for more and more iterations, working our way towards just ever-present more awesomeness and growth. And what we've really heard again and again is that people are, really stoked on like these interviews with, influencers and leaders in the industry and other agency owners and all of that. But where people have been getting the most value so far is really the behind the scenes stuff on what real agencies are doing. We're really in kind of a unique position as a subcontractor where we have amazing relationships with all of these different agencies, and we really get to kind of see and observe what works, what doesn't. We're also very action oriented, so we often, share our own processes and adopt stuff from other people and kind of see how it's doing. Anyway, this correlated really well with the data. Our hiring episode was one of the most popular episodes ever. So we basically sat down and thought, what do we want to do with this? And we realized that we really wanted to continue peeling back the layers for you guys. So while we still want to help you guys communicate really effectively in the digital era, we also kind of want to peel behind the scenes and get real and vulnerable with digital agency owners, not just the kind of like top of the top, creme de la creme, but, just your average everyday person who's the leader running a digital agency, under 10 people, or even sometimes just on their own, and really share about what works, what doesn't, what we found, where we messed it all up. So we're going to be continuing with kind of the interviews and stuff we've been doing so far. But from now on, my chief of ops, Celene and I are also going to be doing a monthly episode. We're going to start with monthly and see how it goes, called Digital Agency Real Talk, where we talk, between the two of us every month about one of the major challenges that we've seen in scaling your digital agency. Some of the kind of top things we hear about all the time, like hiring, obviously being a big one. There's lots we can dig into there. Processes, starting to build a team, what that looks like internally, externally. Copy even, how to manage contractors. And we're just going to get real about what we found to be successful or not. So today is going to be our first episode on this. We're going to talk about processes, but we want to know what you think about this idea. Is this something that is valuable to you? Are you hearing that and thinking like, oh yeah, that's super awesome? Or you're thinking, oh no, I don't know. Anyway, let us know in the comments on iTunes, Stitcher, wherever you happen to listen to podcasts. Don't forget to give us an honest rating when you do. These kinds of things really do make a difference for us. Both we go onto these platforms and read the comments as much as possible, but it also helps us get more visibility and get seen. And we do really, really want to help these people like you, people who are running companies and really wanting to make an impact in the world and maybe be a little bit less stressed, more effective, more productive, work on the stuff that you love while you do it. Anyway, this is all part of an overall coming of age into our brand, but more on that later. In the meantime, let's just start to get into this episode. So first of all, welcome, Celene.
Hi.
So glad to have you back on the show. I mean, honestly, it is a pleasure just to kind of sit down and reflect with you for, half an hour once a week. Really makes a difference for me, and hopefully will make a difference for our listeners too. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what we're going to talk about today?
Today is all about processes. I talk to a lot of digital agency owners, and I'm also involved in a lot of different Facebook and online communities. And over, I see people struggling with processes. What happens a lot of the time is they've started out working on their own, doing it themselves. They know how to do everything. They don't have any processes. They just know what to do instinctively. And then somewhere along the line, they hire someone, they train that person. Time passes, they're now a team of 4 or 5, or they have, some turnover or something, and they realize they don't have any processes. Or maybe they're really smart and they want to get their processes in place before they start to scale, and there's no idea how to do it. That's what we're going to talk about today, and not just the kind of high level that you can find everywhere, like, haha, this is a process. Everyone knows what a process is. But really, like, what's worked for us and what we've done and what we've learned about processes, because we are gigantic process nerds.
Yes, we are gigantic process nerds. And often something I've noticed at least is that sometimes when this information is coming from giant process nerds, it's not always as kind of practical or accessible as it could be, in that it sounds really good on paper, but when you're actually sitting in front of your computer screen with this like blank page writing this thing called a process, it can be really overwhelming or just confusing, or maybe just the kind of thing you procrastinate about forever. So we're going to kind of we're going to try a little bit of a different format here. We're going to talk about a few different things, ranging from, the background, why it's important, the elements of an individual process, how to store and access processes effectively, as well as, creating and implementing processes, how to do that like much more quickly and effectively. But in doing so, we're going to share a little bit around kind of the textbook version of what we have found to be successful. And then we're going to dig a little bit more. I'm going to dig from the perspective of someone who, has done a lot of consulting with people who maybe aren't those big nerds, and talk about some of the kind of things that have worked or things that haven't, and kind of workarounds that we've seen. So super keen on this. Thanks for coming and listening and kind of nerding out on this with us for a little while today. Before we get into the nitty gritty of all this stuff, why don't you start, Celene, by telling us a little bit about why it's important to have processes?
Yes. So I think our readers will probably know a few of these. Sometimes people, you hear processes are so important and everyone just takes it for granted that they're important, but nobody really stops to sit back and think, like, why? Why do we have these? Beyond the obvious. So a couple of things are speed, efficiency. If you already have it written down, you can go through it really quickly because you're not trying to remember how to do things. Or alternately, you can improve efficiency in processes because you can look at it and say, oh, actually, those two things could be done together and save time. Or, let's do it in a different way and it'll be quicker.
Yeah. And don't forget that this isn't just you, like looking at this over again in the future, it's not just you. Other people can look at it too. And it's kind of like they can look at your brain, the way you do things, and show you shortcuts and hacks. It's pretty awesome.
So true. Like after we hired Kevin, he took a whole bunch of the processes that we had previously written and found new ways to automate them.
Yeah, and that is the beauty of having kind of something that is solidified so that different people coming from different backgrounds and perspectives can look at it through their own lens and often see things that you might have missed because you're too close to it.
Yeah, and that they can then relay onto other people because now the process is updated. So if, someone else, a third person, or I go back to do it, I can see the new, quicker way, and that information's kind of there permanently for everyone to find.
Oh, and let's not forget that when people participate in this process of making something better and kind of finding efficiencies and stuff, you are in that way inviting them into the story of the process and helping them be part of creating it, which means that they take ownership of it a lot more if they are someone who is involved with executing it.
So true. Which brings us to the second reason, the ability to scale, and not only scale, but to be able to easily delegate and hand off tasks. So we've done quite a bit of hiring, whether it be for admin, strategists, account manager, and our training period goes so smoothly because we're not training people on how to do tasks. We have processes that tell them how to do tasks. Our one-on-one time is spent doing the more important thing of answering questions, helping them where they actually need help with the process. Like, oh, I'm stuck on this thing, rather than sitting down and showing them the whole thing and having their eyes glaze over as they watch and then going to do it and being confused, they have something to reference. So they can follow this process. They kind of almost train themselves, and then they come to you with questions where it's important, where they're getting stuck. It lets you hand off tasks really easily, as opposed to you being the one with all the knowledge in your head and only you can do these tasks, because there's no process that you can hand off to people.
Yeah, processes can also scale with you. And I mean scale up or down, but also scale in the sense that they can still be effective if you are hiring an expert on something, someone who, you don't necessarily want to micromanage. We'll get into this a little bit later, but there are ways that you can still leverage processes to make sure that they are working within how you want to do things while still giving them the creative leeway to really shine without needing to kind of take back control of that. So more on that later.
The next big thing that kind of goes with scaling is having processes in place is so important if there's turnover. Sometimes, you might have a great admin person or a great developer or whoever it is, but something happens and they leave you. And it sucks. And then you have the stress of hiring someone, the stress of training someone new, and it can really lag your business when you're not up and running because you don't have the people in place. Having processes not only lets the new person easily take over tasks, but sometimes if you're in a lurch, you can hire a temp person to take over that role temporarily while you find the permanent replacement, because they have the processes they can just start following from day one.
Yeah, absolutely. So, speed, efficiency, ability to scale up or down or laterally, knowing what to do in case of a turnover. I think it can also create a lot of context for new hires. We separate our kind of types of processes into a more easily manageable way. And then definitely kind of one or two other things there if you want to bring us home, Celene.
Yes. So yeah, you mentioned understanding routines, and that's really true. Is they can see the list of, oh, these are the things that I do weekly. These are the things I do daily. These are the things I do if there's a trigger, like a new project kicks off. These are the processes for that. So it helps them understand how certain types of tasks fit together and what their daily schedule looks like. The next thing is, this is where processes, a lot of times we start with processes that we do the most often and create processes for that. But processes for things you do only occasionally are also super helpful, like annual tax stuff. Coming back, 12 months later, like, oh, how did I get my tax documents together last year? It was so long ago, you don't remember. Or hiring. What did I do the last time we hired? You forget because you haven't done it recently. So it's great to have that process. And so instead of trying to remember how to do things, you just go through your little checklist. And the very last thing is analyzing where something is breaking down and how to fix it. So sometimes things aren't quite working, or you have just that niggling feeling that you're not doing something the best way. Having a written process can give you the tools to effectively look at how you're doing something in an objective way and seeing where things aren't quite working so you can fix it.
Yeah, I've definitely found this last one is really critical, especially as you start to work with other people, whether those are contractors or in-house. It takes the pressure off of the person a lot of the time. And what I mean that it gives you clarity around whether a person perhaps isn't working out or whether perhaps their directions are simply not clear. Because, this shifts depending on the level of tasks, but especially as you get down into the more granular stuff, you can really look at it and say, okay, if this thing wasn't done correctly or we didn't get the outcome that we wanted, let's review back. Was everyone aware of the outcomes? Because the outcome should be clearly stated. And then in terms of steps, did they follow the steps correctly and the steps were just not working out or faced a challenge that wasn't expected or something? Or were the steps kind of there and clear and plain and they just didn't understand something? Or were they just not following the steps?
Exactly.
Awesome. So I think a lot of this is probably review for you guys. I think we can all appreciate, why processes can be super effective. So let's kind of keep moving right along. If you guys have other ideas that we may not have thought of, or that you've kind of been surprised at one of these, or surprised at how somebody, surprised at kind of a different effect that someone might have out of a process, maybe that you've had or you've seen, definitely we'd love to hear that. Please share. But for now, let's start to dig into what goes into a process. So again, some of you guys might have had process templates or heard of these before. So we're going to dig into kind of the list, but we're also going to reflect a little bit on how each one of these elements actually makes a process effective and practical.
So the first thing, some of these on this list are going to be no-brainers. And some of them are things you might not expect or might not have included in your processes before. The first one is kind of that middle ground. So it's who is responsible for the process. This is often the person who's the one actually doing it, but it's also the person, if somebody else is doing it and they have questions, who can they go to? Who takes ownership of that process?
Yeah, I think this one is interesting because it seems really simple on the surface who is responsible for it. But I found that it's better to kind of get specific here and realize who is responsible for the outcome of it. Sometimes, depending how granular you get with your processes, there might be a requirement for you to, notify somebody when you're done an aspect of something, or even oversee someone else doing an aspect of it. So who is responsible for it? Number one, I found is more effective if it is a single person. Common pitfall is, having anyone who might touch the process be responsible for it. We really want the person who, if this process doesn't get followed, that is the person who needs to be followed up with and had a discussion with. And that creates a lot of clarity because, once again, people like to take ownership of things, but also it kind of removes a lot of that. Hopefully this isn't a problem for you in your organization, but especially when working with new contractors, it can become a little bit of a finger pointing game sometimes when things aren't working out. And this just adds clarity there.
Mm-hmm. The second thing is the goal of the process. So this is just what does this process do? What are you hoping to accomplish by doing it? Fairly straightforward, but very important, because if you have someone new or someone new to the process and they're following this, they might not realize what the main purpose for them doing it is, or they might think they know, but it might not be the same as what you think the goal of it is. So it's good to have one universal goal that everyone is on the same page.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's good to note with all of these things, don't overthink it. The goal of your process, this is the outcome that I was talking about. In the end, when this thing is done, what thing can you look at and say, okay, that is for sure done because this thing was accomplished. So, here you can leverage things like SMART goals, right? At the very least, you do want it to be specific and measurable, if at all possible. Also, timely, then we're getting into executing processes kind of on a tactic level, but really just what is the outcome here? And some kind of things to maybe get you going if you're stuck on this is that often there can be an outcome for you as a company. And if it is something that is client facing, there may also be an outcome for your client. For example, a process for sending a welcome email or kicking off a project, again, depending on the scale of which you're operating. The outcome could be to create a smooth project process for, us, the organization. It could also be to get things going on a really excited and awesome start for the client. Or again, we can challenge ourselves to be more specific and measurable. And that could be to maybe even lower the amount of questions or difficulties that come out. Now, again, this is kind of up to you how specific you want to get. The key here is making sure that you look at that thing and you can say, yes, that was accomplished, or no, that wasn't accomplished when those steps have been finished.
Absolutely. And the third thing is something I see missing in processes all the time. And it's a list of resources or things needed to complete the process. So whether that be a template, access to an account, anything like that, a lot of times I'm halfway through a process and I realize, oh, I need so-and-so's like Gmail access or something that I don't have. And it would be great if I knew upfront what I needed to do it so I could gather it and be ready to complete the process. So what we usually do is we hyperlink them in. So if it's a template, account access, we can't necessarily hyperlink, but templates, any sort of extra guide or resource, those we always have hyperlinked in so that people don't have to go digging for them.
Absolutely. And here, the cloud is your best friend. We try to really operate from a people perspective first, a process perspective second, and a tool perspective third, and not get distracted by things that are too shiny. But here, the cloud is everywhere these days. And the whatever cloud service you use, we use Docs and Drive and all of that and Sheets. Anything that you can hyperlink in directly can be really, really invaluable here. But also, if you don't have all of this the first time, that's okay. This is something that you can also build. Sometimes you're going through a process and you realize, oh, there's this account access needed. Instead of beating yourself up for it and making yourself a mental note to do it later, We recommend, and this is something, thank you to Gretchen and Drina of Left Right Labs for this particular gold nugget of wisdom. Just stop what you're doing, go to the process and add it right then and there. That way, every single time you kind of think about something missing and how to know if there's something missing, if someone else is doing it and asks you a question, something is missing. And then just go back and add it right at that moment. And I think that makes a really big difference because then your process doesn't have to be perfect because it's constantly evolving. Also, if you're not already using some sort of system to govern access and passwords, please, LastPass, 1Password, there are so many of them, but that way you can just reference in the process, okay, it's in this folder or etc. And make sure that people have access to the appropriate, we'll get into kind of organizing processes and what kind of buckets to put stuff in later, but that definitely has been invaluable.
So true. And even if you can't necessarily hyperlink to being logged into the account, you can hyperlink to the login page of somewhere that you need access for. And then if you have LastPass, it'll just fill it right in. Or on one example for one of our processes for a scorecard is you need to be on the reports page of Acuity. You can hyperlink directly to the correct reports page so that someone doesn't, once they get there, they don't need to click through all the different places to get where they need to in the account. You can hyperlink to that part of it, which is super helpful.
Absolutely. So it'll send you to the login page, but once they do log in, it'll keep going to the appropriate page, which is freaking awesome.
The next one is the actual steps, what most people think of when they think of processes. I'm not going to touch too much on this one now, because we're going to talk about it later. But depending on the detail of your process, they can be kind of high-level things, or they can be like ridiculously nitty-gritty detail steps. But again, we'll talk about that later. I don't want to get too much into that right now. So I'm just going to zoom right on to the next element, which is kind of a bonus element. Not all processes need to have one of these, but they're super helpful, especially if somebody else is going to be doing the task, is a checklist to make sure that the process was done right. So whether that be, for formatting, like, is this done? Is this done? Is this done? Or, whatever the checklist is, it's super helpful that people can say, did I do the process right? And that helps build confidence, avoid confusion, and hopefully, mistakes later on.
Yes. Also, and we'll get into kind of ways to deploy processes a little bit later, but if you are using a project management system of some kind, this becomes more relevant because you can store the checklist aspect of it in the project management system and then either have the more detailed kind of processes elsewhere or once again, detailed out within the project management system, depending which one you use. So once again, more on that later. But that's not the end of the list.
There are two more things. So the second to last thing is the what's next step. Because nothing's worse than when somebody finishes a task and they're just like, okay, they dust off their hands and they walk away and that task is done. But nobody ever gets alerted. So like me as a team leader, I don't know if that task got done. I never find out. I just assume they didn't do it. Or maybe another team member is waiting on them to complete that task in order to do the next step. Or it triggers another task. So does someone need to be alerted? Is there a triggered task? What's next? This is a critical step that's often missed. And if it is missed, then often what happens is someone just does a task and nothing else happens, which can really lag projects or get confusing, like, weeks down the road. Someone asks, did you ever do that? And they're like, oh yeah, I did it. I just kind of, I guess somewhere in my brain assumed you knew. But they didn't because it wasn't in the process.
Oh, yeah. This is one of those things where, and I'm obsessed with behavioral psychology, but this is one of those things where when you see a checklist and you see a process and you work your way through it, it may seem really obvious that someone needs to tell someone something or, notify somebody on Slack or etc. But the reality is that when you get to the end of that checklist, if there's nothing else there, if you have kind of created a culture and habit of it, then it's actually very organic and simple and easy to, without thinking, just check that off and get that kind of dopamine hit from it being done and checked off. So taking the time to think about it is also one of those things where it might seem obvious, but when you take the time to think about it, it's like, what will kind of qualify this as being done? Because the what next step is always the last step, right? That's always, okay, everything is 100% complete. what next? Don't forget the how is the other thing. If somebody else on your team or the client or one of your contractors needs to be notified, don't forget to write down how they need to be notified. Is it through Slack? Is it through your PM system? Is it through email? That clarity and those questions, in my experience, actually help you become a better leader and project manager and all that kind of stuff, because they help you simplify a little bit while you're doing it, because it starts to become obvious if, you have 5 different ways of communicating something, or if you're telling everyone to kind of tell people stuff on Slack, and so things are falling through the cracks on the PM system. So I wouldn't get, once again, don't overthink this. Just make sure you have who and how, and over time, be open to shifting these things as you think of a better way.
Mm-hmm.
And last but not least, our last step.
Yeah, speaking of things seeming obvious but potentially not being obvious, is one of the most important things that any process has. Even if you don't write anything else in the process and just have like the name of the process in this, it's not ideal, but you can still get away with it, is a recorded video walkthrough of the task being done. So there's a couple reasons you'd want to do this. One, it's great for training. If, someone, especially if they're a visual learner, they can watch the video of the task being performed and kind of go through it that way, and then use the written one as kind of a checklist going forward. The other reason is that sometimes when you're writing something, these steps might seem really obvious to you, but someone else looking at that from their own perspective, their own context with their own training, might not understand your steps in the same way, or might not have enough detail in order to understand what to do. I mean, there's that classic viral YouTube video of the dad who asks his kids to write down a process for making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And then he follows it to a T, and he ends up, putting the jar of jam on the loaf of bread without ever opening anything, because he said, put the jam on the bread. Instead of, open the jar of jam, take the knife, scoop some, But it's true that, and we found this to be true as well, is that someone reading your process might not interpret it in the same way that what you intended when you typed it out. So having that video is really powerful. Also, if for some reason you're in a crunch and you need to have a lot of processes, but you don't have time to type them all, you can always record the video walkthrough and have someone else write up the process at a future time. So, there's a couple of reasons why that's really valuable to have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would even say that a video in some way saves you from yourself and your need to potentially get super, super granular on paper and never complete it at all. Because I would say that's one of the biggest kind of challenges that I hear from leaders in digital agencies when they start to create processes, is actually feeling overwhelmed getting started at all, and maybe just creating one or two or giving up, or never even creating one or two, because there's so much pressure to get it right and get it specific. I really encourage you guys to embrace done is the new perfect. And recording a video walkthrough can be a nice balance to, make sure that you're giving something that shows how to do it right. And also, freeing yourself to do a little bit less of an intense written walkthrough, so that people, can use it a little bit more as a checklist or a reference point, instead of, putting that pressure on yourself to make sure every single little step is getting written down and followed. Okay, so I know that might have seen, that was what we got there. I think 7 different kind of elements, 6 or 7 different elements to remember there. And I will say that, once again, it might seem like a lot, but all of this often can fit on a single page. This really, in practice, it's better to just kind of get them going and get them referenced and get them being improved than, worry about making sure that every single one of these steps is perfect. And I will also say, though, that of all of these different things, I would say that the what next is one of the most critical. And that is just the one thing, just don't be tempted to forget. Anyway, as we move into the next section here, we're going to talk about how to store and access processes. So this is something, you might be thinking, oh, okay, I have one here, written down in a notebook. Maybe I have this Google Doc. Maybe I'm tempted by a really, really shiny online tool that helps me gloriously organize and all of these things. It writes the processes for you. I don't know. There's lots of shiny tools out there. We've been tempted too. So we're just going to talk a little bit about how we kind of simplified our organization and kind of deployment of processes to make them really easy to implement and not overwhelming for our team, which, believe it or not, the people on our team may not be quite as obsessive about organization and processes as Celene and I don't know. They're pretty up there, but Celene and I maybe set a whole new level.
Nobody's as obsessed with processes as we are.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Okay. So how do we store and access our processes, Celene? Why don't you tell me?
So originally, like way back in the day, we had them kind of in separate areas, whether that be like a mind map or a Google Doc with instructions. But over time, we realized it just made so much more sense to have our processes directly in Teamwork, because that way we can assign tasks and the information's right there. You don't have to go searching for a separate process. Everything someone needs to complete that task is in the task itself.
Okay, just want to pause you there, Celene. So for our listeners who may not know, again, we want to kind of take the focus off the tool a little bit. So what is Teamwork for those people who don't know?
Oh, it's our project management system. So yeah, we use Teamwork and we absolutely love it. But this kind of same process can also work in Asana or Trello or Basecamp or any other project management system that you happen to use.
Yeah, I think what I am, from that, again, that kind of practical perspective from working with a lot of people, the point here is number one, pick one place to keep as many of them as possible. And number two, make that a place where the people who are going to be accessing those processes already hang out. So if that's you and these are for you, make sure they are in a place where you go all of the time. And if it is for your team, make sure it is in a place that either your team already goes all of the time or that they can and will go all of the time without it kind of disrupting their day and what they're already doing.
Mm-hmm. And then wherever that place may be, how we do it is we basically break down and store our processes by what kind of branch of the company they pertain to. So an easy way of starting out is if you have one section for sales and marketing, one for projects and operations, and one for admin and finance. We've kind of broken it down a little bit more than that. I know, say, you can probably talk more on kind of different options, but the important thing is to make sure that there's some sort of logical hierarchy or organizational system so that you know where to go looking for a process.
Yes, absolutely. A process is only as good as it is used. This is like, for those of you guys who are connected into the copy and content marketing world, they say that it is, 10 to 20% production and then 80 to 90% publication and visibility, right? Like that stuff isn't going to be taking action for you unless you are actually kind of getting the eyes on the thing. It's kind of the same thing here where it is so much of it is simplicity. If you are not using that process, 10 to 20% of it is creating it, 80 to 90% of it is implementing it. So what we do is we really just use a few buckets. So we have one that was taught to us by a program called the UGurus Community back in the day. They've since upgraded kind of their system of looking at it. But for us, we just started with those buckets: sales and marketing, projects and ops, and admin and finance. And we found that as we've grown, for example, sales and marketing now, although they talk, they are two different buckets. We have two different people who lead them. Likewise, admin and finance have kind of separated their way out. But once again, we just kept it simple until we needed to kind of complexify or separate it because there was a really good reason. Now, I will say that since then, I have read and seen several other models that I really, really like. Now, once again, simplicity for us, it isn't broken, so we have had no reason to fix it. But, we're big fans of Mike Michalowicz, author of Profit First and Clockwork, and he has a model that's really easy to remember called ACDC. So attract, convert, delight, and collect. And he kind of considers those the buckets that he organizes everything into. UGurus, one of our sister organizations and one that we have gotten so much value from over the years, simplified it even more. They have attract, win, and delight. So if you kind of relate that back, right, attract is that sales and marketing piece in both of those platforms. Convert whether is the same thing as win, right? Which is that, you could even say attract is more the marketing, convert could be, the sales and everything that gets you through to that sale, which kind of includes the finance in UGurus, but not in the ACDC model where that's in collect. And then in all cases, delight, right? Delight, the project, the thing that you're actually delivering, which keeps the focus purely on delivering value. So however you want to organize that, you can look further into each of those models. They're all relatively easy to kind of find more information on. Just, again, keep it simple. If you're not sure, pick one. Pick the acronym that you like. Pick the one that resonates for you. Pick it out of a bucket. Pick it out of a hat. Honestly, these are simple for a reason. And actually, as we move towards kind of the how to create processes part of it that I know you guys have all been waiting for, this really references back to something that you hear me say again and again and again. I mean, to be honest, this is one of our values at Anansi, and we are the first to want to needlessly overcomplicate things. Believe me, it is something I struggle with every gosh darn day. But simplicity really is king here. If you can create simple, high level processes that are easy to remember, those I have seen again and again will serve you better than kind of getting ultra granular and overwhelming yourself. You can always complexify later. You can always get more specific and focus in on a certain area. But if you keep things, under 5 steps, that is something that you can store in your brain. And that means that it is way more useful and way more practical for you. So this is just kind of an example of it in action. You can see that all these different kind of influencers and people that we love who've helped us in our business are doing the same thing. They're simplifying things at a high level. Okay, I know that was that was a lot to take in, but why don't you just keep going, Celene? Anything else to say on kind of storing and accessing processes?
Yeah. As you get more and more processes, you'll probably find you have like this long, endless list of processes that's hard to kind of scan and find the one you're looking for. So that's kind of when you can start breaking it down into more subcategories. Like, do you have like quarterly finance tasks, or in teamwork they're called task lists, but they're basically categories of tasks that you can start organizing them a little bit more and more, so that again they're easy to find at a high level, and then you have a shorter list to skim to find the process. Or keeping them together, things that go in order. For example, when we have a new project, we have like a task list that's the project setup task list. So what are all the different processes that go into setting up a new project? They're all housed together because they're done together. So you're not looking in different places to try and find them.
Yes, absolutely. Now, we also have a document that we use that's basically just an index. We call it our resource index. We keep our literal processes as well as, the templates we reuse over and over again, resources, which is, helpful information, all of that kind of stuff in kind of a central sheet, which is easy for people to kind of control F if they're looking for stuff. And we found that to be really helpful. But I will say, earlier on in my consulting days, I really pushed this a little bit more because it was really helpful for me. But I do see people getting a little bit overwhelmed at having this kind of one central place to consistently update. So I will say that really just an effective bucketing system, even just 3 folders or 4 folders where you dump everything if you're storing it in, say, like Google Docs, or, categories if you're using something like Teamwork or a different PM system that can kind of store those processes internally. I would really say that from a practical perspective, that's way more important, and just focus on that for a while before you try to, complexify or, create a new thing that you have to kind of manage and keep on top of.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, now we're moving towards the extremely exciting part.
Yes. So that's all about storing and accessing. Yes, we're now on to the extremely exciting part, which is, okay, now that you know why a process is important and where to store it and all that kind of stuff, how do you actually start making processes? So we're going to talk about this at 2 levels. We're going to talk about it at a high level, like how do you start creating processes, and what do you do to create them, and how do you do them? And then we're also going to get to like the nitty gritty, like creating an actual process. What does that look like? And surprisingly, creating the actual process is probably the least important part of all of this, because once creating a process isn't actually that bad. It's how to use it and implement it that people get stuck on.
And how to get going. That's what I hear over and over again.
Yes.
Is, how do I get going? How do I not get stuck? How do I unstick myself? How do I be less of a perfectionist on this? Those are kind of the questions I hear again and again. Once again, if you have different questions or different things you'd like us to maybe talk about or dig deeper in a future episode, or if we're totally off the mark, we want to hear about it. Email us.
So, very first thing, if you are intimidated by starting to create processes, I would recommend, it's easy to put it off because it's intimidating, but I would recommend not putting it off, because the longer you put it off, the more processes you're going to have in your business to record, and the more people you're going to have to liaise with. It's going to be even harder. So, I mean, in a perfect world, you'd start this from day one. That's not realistic. Usually there's a point at which people realize they need processes, and that's when they start. But whenever that point is, the very first thing to do is just to brainstorm a list of all the different tasks that you or team members do throughout a week. You can keep adding to that list as you find yourself doing or assigning new tasks that aren't on that list. These are usually like the most common frequent tasks that you do or things that you want to start delegating. So if you are thinking of hiring a VA or someone to work with you, then maybe start with the tasks that are the things that you want to hand off to somebody else.
Yes, this is something that, again, on a practical level, Chris Ducker, I believe, is someone who he has quite a bit of content on hiring a VA if that's something you specifically want to do. But I found him quite helpful in terms of this whole make a list thing. Sometimes when you're in it, in the weeds, making that list can be a little bit more challenging than you expect because you may not even know what you want to delegate or what someone else could do. Or, maybe it seems like that thing, like design is so big and unwieldy that you're not really sure where to start. And what I've really found here is, and again, just quoting Chris here, is number one, the things that you really, really, really hate doing. Those are the things that usually are not so difficult to think about. And if you're not sure, ask the people around you. Ask your, partner or best friend or, person in your co-working space that you sit next to. Really just, or someone on your team, ask them. Believe me, they'll tell you. The people around me can tell me, that's for sure. And start with that because those are the things that will give you like small wins. Now, it's not always possible to, delegate or process out every single one of those things, but doing it will bring you one step closer to not having to do those things anymore. And that can be a pretty solid motivator. The next level, and I'll be honest, I'm not 100% sure, I don't have this in front of me if I'm quoting this exactly in the right order, but this is really what I kind of walk people through. The second thing is the stuff that you really don't know how to do. So this is stuff, I get caught on this all the time. Like the other day, I was requested by Kevin, our chief of admin, to walk him through how to create flowcharts for internal use. And I'm like preparing for our call and I'm like doing some hardcore Googling. And then I realized that most of my knowledge is going to come from this Googling, that even though I've made lots of flowcharts, I have not made them for internal purposes. And that me kind of learning how to do it so that I can teach someone else how to do it was kind of funny. So ask yourself, what are the things that you do that you find yourself, needing to kind of Google as you do them or etc. Guaranteed there is something in your business that you do that for. And, those aren't quite as important as the things that you hate. But once again, processing those things out, number one, shows you how to do them. So it's less overwhelming to do it every time. But once again, kind of prepares you or shows you that maybe you're not as familiar as you think you are to delegate. And last but not least, and this is the stuff I definitely struggle with the most, and this is where the high level processes can come in real handy, is stuff that you shouldn't be doing. Oh yeah, had one of those the last few weeks. Oh, our site copy needs to be rewritten. Yes, say we'll do it. But I can tell you, having that high level idea of how I wanted it done, as well as looking at our copy process for how we get these types of projects done, really, really helped remind me that I shouldn't be doing it. And then also I can trust someone else to do it. Anyway, so if you are already brainstorming and writing, great. If not, this can be like, set yourself a task right the heck now. When are you going to do this? When are you going to brainstorm some of those top things to process out? And I'm going to say that you may be tempted to make yourself a list of 10, 20, 30 different things. And yeah, you can do that. But I challenge you to start with one or two. Like make that list, kind of put it all out there. But look at, what are the most common, frequent, critical, delegatable, hated tasks that you do. And just pinpoint like a top 5 or something, because otherwise that list can be overwhelming. All right, back to you, Celene.
Super great about the overwhelming part, which is why, at a high level, I would say that if you're just getting started with processes, don't just try and think you're going to do all your processes at once. You are going to go down this rabbit hole of misery and carpal tunnel syndrome. And you're not going to remember to eat for 10 hours straight. Just set yourself a goal.
Never been there.
I know it doesn't sound like I'm speaking from experience at all. Set yourself a goal of just putting down 1 or 2 processes a week. Before you know it, you'll have, in a month, if you do 2 a week, that's 8 processes. You don't need to get all your processes out at once. You will go crazy and you'll start thinking processes are awful. I have no time to run my business. I'm so busy with processes all the time.
Agreed. Or once again, if I'm going to kind of real talk this, once again, psyching yourself out so you don't do it at all. And if I'm going to real talk this, if you have someone who's super nerdy about processes, or if you're feeling really, really motivated, that's kind of an accountability or something you need. It's really the critical next thing. By all means, 1 or 2 a week. For those who are struggling, rather than 1 or 2 a week, where, there's potentially the danger of, okay, you get one done the first week, maybe one done the second week, and then the third week you don't get it done. The fourth week you miss, but then do it again. Then you kind of lose motivation and, get down on yourself and all that kind of stuff. I would say start with 1 or 2, period. If you have kind of followed step 1 here and have made a list of those tasks that you hate, and you've already kind of isolated what those top ones are, then actually don't set yourself any kind of routine or any kind of like really ambitious or pressureful goal until you literally have just completed 1 or 2. And not just completed 1 or 2, but put them into practice. Because once again, that whole thing that processes are kind of useless unless you use them. Funny how that works. Pick 1 or 2 of things that you do all the time or really hate doing, and then give yourself time to reference them and play with it and see how it works. Like, do it really simple and sloppy even, and give yourself time to kind of repeat it over and over again. Because 1 or 2 processes that you use all of the time that make your life easier, not only, again, on that kind of like self-motivation level, you're going to get that win feeling that's going to motivate you to keep going. You're also going to be able to see kind of what works or what doesn't for you in terms of using it, but more importantly, kind of creating and applying it. And lastly, that will actually give it time to be effective in your business. 1 or 2 well-used processes is going to be super helpful, as opposed to like 10 or 15 that you like keep in a book or a document somewhere and never use.
Yeah. And one of my little air quote life hacks for writing processes is to write the process while you're doing that task. So, it can kind of seem daunting if you're setting aside time and there's that pressure. You're sitting there and you're like, okay, I got to write a process. And suddenly your brain blanks and you're like, I don't remember how I do this. I do it all the time, but I can't articulate, I don't remember it. The easiest way for me, at least, is to do it while you're doing the task. So you're kind of going through it, and every time you do a step, you just kind of jot like notes on, a Google Doc and split screen or whatever it is. Sure, like the task will take a little bit longer that one time, but then you kind of have that process done and it doesn't add that much extra time from your regular routine. You can even just start with like the really high level process, just like, 4 or 5 super basic steps. And then the next time you do that task, that's when you can start adding in more detail.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where kind of making those decisions ahead of time, like what is your central process storage place, right? How are you going to kind of tackle these? You're going to start high level, you're going to start with a video, where are you going with it? That can become really helpful here because, when you're in the moment and writing the process, you don't have to make those decisions. Like, am I going to open a Google Doc? Am I going to open Teamwork? You can either start in the medium that you're going to go, or if you're, a do or die, kind of do it right now, or like get distracted and don't do it at all, then you can jot it down in notes or in docs or whatever. And then just know that you need to transfer it. Again, if you're focusing on 1 or 2, transfer it into the place where that's going to be your central reference and reference it from there. And then you kind of have the freedom to do it while the inspiration strikes you, but you've already have the clarity on where it's going to live, right? So you don't have to kind of struggle with having things in a million different places. Again, if you already have that admin support or that organized person on your team or etc., then this can be really handy to kind of have them maybe let them know, okay, I created this kind of high level thing. Can you like store it in the right place or etc.? But honestly, I encourage you to put it in that place yourself, especially at first. This is something I got from David Allen of Getting Things Done, but anything that you have in reference, whether that's a digital reference or paper reference, if that's your thing, I suggest these are digital just because, we do serve digital agencies in this. But kind of doing that work ahead of time, you're just making it really should be accessible within 60 seconds. Whatever you have to do to make it accessible within 60 seconds. Again, we find that having buckets, maybe those are folders on Google Drive that you then can search through or glance through or something like that. Just filing it yourself means that you are 10 times more likely to use it again and know where to find it. But, once that volume starts to build up a little bit, which again, go deep, not wide. Start with a few, really, really use them. Then you can kind of get more complex if you want, or have someone else who's kind of like managing it and taking care of it, or et cetera. But definitely this is a use it or lose it type thing.
And if you kind of follow this process and you chip away at them, before you know it, you'll have a lot of processes. Like creating processes isn't supposed to be something that's like all encompassing and takes over your life and you're always stressing about. Let's just say, in theory, you do an average of one a week for a year. At the end of the year, which is a relatively short period of time in business, you'll have 52 processes. That's a lot of freaking processes that you'll have written down. You can delegate, you can reference, you can tweak without it being like a ton of immediate stress on you.
Yeah. And I just want to say here once again, if that number, you got like a little bit stressed hearing that, you're like 52. Oh my God. That's a lot of pressure. I have to create 52 this year. Once again, scale that back to one a month, right? One key process in your business, even if it's just a high level one, right? Like our whole content process. And, we take on a lot of projects. We've done well over 100 projects in the last few years. That it's a 4-step process. It was a 3-step process. We over time realized that we were missing something critical there. Now it's a 4-step process. I could quote those 4 steps and what they mean. And in fact, if you aren't already familiar with them, we will be unpacking them in some future episodes because they are 4 steps that anybody can use to create an effective content process. Those in a lot of ways are anchors for us, right? In almost all, like even in my meetings, when I'm absorbing and kind of making a checklist in my head, I love to kind of just understand what the kind of 5 or less kind of key points or key takeaways or key actions or et cetera are. Not everybody kind of has that systematic thinking, but it's definitely something that gets developed as you start to kind of think in high level steps. And guaranteed, this is something that as a habit, and it's really, really important to make this a habit, I believe from the depths of my heart and the depths of honestly my brain and my experience, that getting into the habit and creating a culture of kind of breaking things down into simple steps and having these like awesome communication references, this will improve not just your internal operations, not just your connections and communications with everybody, but it will directly benefit your marketing and your bottom line in so many different ways, because that clarity and that simplicity that comes, especially if you're kind of using the high level steps, that is invaluable. And it starts to translate, when you start to think, oh, okay, who gets notified at the end of something? Like I said, that brings up other questions in your business that kind of talk about, okay, am I doing all of this myself? Is the client knowing about things kind of at the appropriate moments? Anyway, there's a lot here. And it all starts with really, really just 1 or 2 core processes in your business and 4 or 5 high-level steps. Not overwhelming at all. And if you are still feeling overwhelmed, again, email one of us. This is something that we are huge, crazy nerds about. We'd love to hear what is overwhelming you, because maybe it's something we're missing because we're too close to it. And also maybe there's, a resource or a template or something that we could kind of throw your way that would make your life a little bit easier. Anyway, we're not quite done. There's a few more steps here. I know that was, again, quite a bit. But Celene, what did I miss anything here?
Well, I know you talked a lot about kind of instilling that culture with your team. And yes, the culture processes is so important. And, especially if you take the time to kind of train your team members to follow them and, to update them or create them if it's appropriate to their role, that is so critical. I was talking to a digital agency owner recently, and he was venting to me that he has all these processes for everything. Every single step of every single project is clearly written out, but his agency is such a mess because nobody follows the processes at all. It's just like, I think he described it as the Wild West. So, processes, and I know you mentioned this probably 3 or 4 times in the podcast episode already, processes are only as valuable as to the extent that they're being followed.
Yeah, absolutely. And one last thing here is, we've noted throughout kind of some ways that you can do this, especially like inviting people to participate in the process, whether that is recording videos and having them change them, whether that is having them read them over or look at them, whether that's having them create them and you look them over and look at them. This can also be a really awesome way to kind of gauge whether someone is absorbing how to do something effectively, is having them create the process for something that they already know.
And it takes the pressure off you.
Yes.
Because the whole point of this is to delegate. If you have a team member, don't create processes for them if it's their role. Have them create their own processes.
Agreed. And this last step here in creating and implementing processes is that it is important to review them. Now, we have here in our notes that kind of you want to review things preferably quarterly, but especially right before hiring to see how processes have been changed and perhaps not updated. That is very true. I will say this, though, is that it can once again be a little bit overwhelming to kind of think that you're going to systematically update all of your processes on a regular basis. So this is something that we, again, if you have that operations person or if you are hiring and it's really important and you have that strong impetus, definitely do kind of more of a systematic review. Especially if you have someone who's been kind of doing it on some level, like having them review it is critical. But I will say this, that once again, if you have a strong culture of pulling out the process and referencing it, whether that's you or someone else, every time you do the thing, your processes will get reviewed and updated. This is not pull it out every 3 months, blow the dust off of it, tweak it a little bit, and then put it back on its shelf kind of a thing. This is a tactical, consistently changing, upgrading kind of a thing where, like I said, every single time you're applying it, if you're getting a question from someone else who's doing the work that they don't understand, that is your cue to update that process. If you are doing something and you're like, oh, I forgot this, or this isn't quite working, or I don't really remember how to do that, bam, that's your cue to update the process. Do it now, not later.
Yeah. And if all else fails, and you don't update, for example, right before hiring and your processes are out of date, you will find out quickly after hiring when somebody new starts doing a process based on the written process and not kind of how things have evolved. Whether they need updating because they'll be doing it wrong in the notice or they'll have lots of questions.
Yeah.
So it'll get updated one way or another.
All right. Did you want to break down? So that was most of kind of at a high level, what to do, things to consider, etc. We actually have, you already have all the pieces that go into a process. But if we're talking about the actual step by step, the kind of number, do this and then do that. If you are doing more than just, 4 to 5 step high level, or if you're trying to find your 4 to 5 step high level or less, what does that look like?
So this is what we call our boss system, which obviously you came up with because you're an amazing genius. And actually, it doesn't even just apply to processes. It applies to pretty much everything, whether you're writing content or really like hiring, doing anything else. But what BOSS stands for is brainstorm, organize, simplify, and shine. So brainstorm, just dump all your ideas down. Like whether it be a bulleted list or however you like to put information, just dump it out of your head and onto the page. Don't worry about too much about what goes where. The second step is organize, the O in BOSS. So now that everything's just dumped out, you can start to kind of see certain steps might go together or go in a logical order. You can move them around. I often do this in Google Docs. I know you do this brilliantly, amazingly in mind maps. But however you do it, once you dump it onto the page, start to organize it. And that kind of brings us to our next step is simplify. Once it's all organized, you'll probably start to see redundancies. Once you move some steps together, you might realize that some of your things are almost kind of the same thing, or they could go together. Or maybe there's even a piece missing between the two, so you can kind of start to simplify it. And then the final thing is shine. So now, you've dumped it all down, you've put it into a logical order, you've simplified it wherever possible. Then, this one isn't as quite important for processes, but, like the shine. So when I write processes, because I'm a ridiculous nerd, this is where I like bold things. I add numbered lists with like sub bullets. I hyperlink things in. I do all the crazy formatting stuff that I do with my processes. But even if you just do the BOSS of BOSS, you're still pretty golden.
Yes, agreed. One of the reasons that I like the shine step is once again because it gives me permission to not shine it at every other step. So that means whether I'm going through the brainstorm, the organize, or the simplify phase, I can kind of let it be messy. I know that many of our listeners can relate to a sense of perfectionism. And I know that's something I've been referencing a lot throughout this interview. The reason that I mention it so much is not just because it's been such a huge barrier for us, but because I've heard again and again and again from leaders that this is something that's holding them back. So do give yourself permission both to shine and to shine the work that you're doing, but do it at the appropriate place, right? A brainstorm, it's called a storm. It's supposed to be messy. It's great to blurt it out. This comes in when you're writing as well. The key to great writing is being willing to write badly. And usually you write badly by just blurting stuff out on the page. At the organized step, at this point, you're really just kind of looking for patterns, looking for, things you might have missed or ways that can kind of be massaged or rearranged, which if you're trying to do those steps at the same time, that can not really work super well. So each of these, you really have to do them in order, one at a time. Likewise, simplifying, you'll be surprised if you have brainstormed and organized individually. That simplifying gets you much further than you might think. That's where all the things that are kind of repeated or confusing or whatever, you just focus on making sure that they are clear. Clear is the new clever. And once again, shine when you get there. There's your chance to polish it. If shine is not your thing, give it to somebody else to shine. That is okay too. And your shine doesn't have to be the most perfect thing in the world. It just has to be functional and ready to go. Okay, so we have covered a lot in this episode. I know that this might be a lot for you guys to take in. Hopefully, if you do want to kind of absorb this more, you've hit the download button or whatever, and you have just set yourself up so that you can kind of absorb this in greater detail. But I just want to do a quick review of everything that we've covered here. So first we get into kind of the background and why. Number one is just stop storing stuff in your head. You can't store everything in your head. It needs to be stored somewhere else. And that is basically what a process is. It is the stuff that goes on in your or someone else's head to create a certain outcome. And it is being put in a physical and referenceable form. Not only does this mean that you don't have to be a crazy master computer person, which you are not, you have other skills, which is usually being creative and problem solving and doing your stuff and your expertise in the moment. Honestly, having even just a few processes at a high level, this is what makes you look like a superstar. Right? This is what let you delegate, get your sanity back, give your clients clarity. And most importantly, it is easier than you think. Let's get into how it can be easier than you think. Okay, so we get into the elements of it. So the top level key elements here, making sure that you have the name of who's responsible, again, responsible for the outcome, the goal or the outcome, the actual steps, the what next step, which is critical. What happens when you're done? Who gets notified? What happens next? And last but not least, a video walkthrough. Now, sometimes you can just go with the video walkthrough and have everybody else kind of create, not everybody else, but someone else pull from that. That can be really powerful. Next, Google it before you create it. I'm not sure if we touched on this or went too deep into this before, but always good to kind of do a little look or have someone else do a little look. If it is something related to an app in particular, it may be that somebody else already has that video, already has that process. And of course, I already referenced this, but if you suck at it, if you suck at making processes, just make a video and have someone else pull from there. Better yet, Google it, find somebody else's video and pull from there as well. Again, that is another Mike Michalowicz suggestion from the book Clockwork. Can't recommend it enough. Next, we get into storing and accessing. So you have one central location, preferably one that you use daily already. A central resource index can help, but really don't overcomplicate it. And if the thought of a reference sheet, whether that's a sheet or a doc or whatever, has you feeling super overwhelmed, don't worry about it. Most importantly, create a simple, high-level organization system to start with 4 or less buckets. Last, we get into the creating and implementing. So start with your most frequent or most hated tasks. Plan like a boss, as we just said. So brainstorm, organize, simplify, and shine. Don't overdo it. Start with 1 or 2 a week, or just start with 1 or 2, period. And, do it while you do it, which is to say that while you're already motivated and doing the task, that is a great time to actually record the process, even if it's just simple and messy and dirty. Just jot something down. The most important thing is that you reference it, review it, use it. Focus on fewer processes that actually get used and make your life easier, and then use that and that motivation and that knowledge to give you more processes. Last but not least, make it a habit. Make it a habit for everyone. Constantly reference them, constantly use them, or they will not help you. Okay, so that was like a full hour of talking that we just kind of reviewed in a minute or two. In case you're feeling, a little bit overwhelmed with all of this, Celene, what have we got for our audience to maybe make this easier?
We have I feel like doing an Oprah voice, but I'm terrible at impressions, a process guide for everyone. So because this is a real talk episode, I'm going to be completely candid and say that I actually haven't put it together yet at the time of our interview. However, I can guarantee you that it will include a template for processes and our process for creating processes that we use all the time. And yes, I'm such a nerd that I have a process for creating processes.
Yeah, that's something we didn't touch on this episode, but that really, I don't suggest that that's your first process that you create, because once you've kind of made a few of them more messily, you will have a better idea of what works to create a process around that. But definitely, it's not weird to have a process about creating processes, okay? It's a good idea.
Yeah, especially if you have team members that are going to be creating processes and you're super anal about exactly how you like them laid out.
Yes, but also, as a motivation to get people going, also the spirit of processes really remains making sure that everyone is on the same page about how to achieve an outcome that everyone is also on the same page about. So if you think about it, process for creating processes fits that perfectly. Anyway, if you want to access this content upgrade, which is the official term, if you're not familiar with it, look it up. Anyway, something that we love, provide, and recommend, then we will be putting this together. Once again, it will consist of the things that we actually use every day, templates that we use all the time for creating resources. So definitely check out the show notes, anansicontent.com, A-N as in Nancy, A-N as in Nancy, SICON as in Nancy again, TENT.com/podcast. Is that the right URL?
Yes.
I believe so. Yes, we'll make sure it is. Okay, we will have the show notes for this episode, as well as all of this awesome stuff that we've referenced, and this particular and awesome helpful guide for you guys. You can get started on this right away. And once again, you guys have probably noticed all throughout this episode, I've been saying, let us know what you think. Email us. So if you're not sure kind of what to do or, where to kind of let us know, honestly, you can email me directly at say@anansicontent.com. That's SAY @anansicontent.com. Or Celene, CELENE @anansicontent.com. We really want to hear from you. We want to hear what you think of this, whether it was helpful for you, ideas for what would be more helpful for you. One of the things that we love about being a white label subcontracting digital agency is our capacity and ability, and in fact, like imperative, to talk to and learn from and share with as many digital agency leaders as possible. This is something we love, we're passionate about. So by all means, reach out, leave that review, subscribe, all of that fun stuff. And let us know what you think of this regular episode that we're going to be doing, and this regular segment that we're going to be doing. We've got some really cool topics coming up for you in the next few weeks. We're going to dig further, more deeply into hiring. We're going to get into what makes a successful content process. What are some other things we're going to talk about, Celene?
Oh my goodness, I'm just so excited on this, I can't even remember. Manage, good thing I have a list.
Of course you do.
Things, everything that revolves around managing a remote team, whether that be communicating, cascading messages when there's a whole bunch of people that aren't working in the same place. Like, how do you make sure that you're always on the same page? Planning and projecting for the future of a business. quarterly planning, which is something that kind of goes with planning that we do and love, and I could talk about for a whole hour, almost as if it's a podcast episode. Like all the things that come around scaling, uniting a team under single vision, and and also getting things accomplished, breaking down a goal into a nitty gritty and making sure things actually get done. Those are just some of the ones that we have already. If you have anything you'd like to hear us talk about, this is a regular segment we need to fill. So we are always open to suggestions.
Yes, absolutely. I'm so excited about this. We have learned so much. One of the things that even we've learned really just in the last quarter or so, which will come as no surprise to anyone who's worked with us, is that we are hugely action oriented. And we are the kind of people who we hear things. We don't just kind of experiment in every direction willy-nilly, but we do love taking action. And that's why, we're so obsessed with kind of being practical and efficient. And we really want to bring this to you guys too. We hear that taking action can be terrifying, paralyzing, overwhelming. And we know what that's like. We want to help you take action faster, more decisively, and be able in some ways to kind of fail faster so that you can succeed and thrive faster. Anyway, I'm just rambling on. I'm super stoked now, but we're going to wind that off. I think that does it for today's episode. Tune in next week for more delicious, delicious content on peeling back the information on what it's like to run a digital agency. So thank you, Celene. I love getting this opportunity to chat with you. And I love getting this opportunity to share our superpower with the world.
Yes, and thank you so much for having me.
Yes, and thank you to all of our listeners. That is you, and yes, I mean you, who is listening to this right now. I was at a conference last weekend. A whole bunch of people came out to me, told me how much they love the podcast, what they think about it, all this different type of stuff, and holy cow, that was so freaking inspiring and awesome. As maybe you can tell by this renewed energy and all these different questions that we're bringing in here. Okay, guys, that does it for today. Hope you have an excellent, excellent rest of your day. And that does it for another amazing episode of the Say It Online podcast. Join us next week. And don't forget to like and subscribe, whether it's iTunes, whatever your favorite podcast player is. It is always, always appreciated. It really makes a difference for us. It helps us get this word out to more people. As always, this episode was brought to you by our sponsor and Say's own business, Anansi Content. If you're a digital agency owner and you're still wasting too much time chasing down content that maybe isn't even all that great, let's talk. We've spent years working on the best process for selling, planning, and delivering amazing conversion content for your client projects. Better yet, we moosh our process to yours so that your client and you have a seamless and amazing experience the entire time through. If you're interested, just go to our website. That's www.anansicontent.com. That's ANANSI content.com. And just click Let's Talk. I'd love to chat with you. Someone else on the team would also love to chat with you too. Hope you have an amazing rest of your day.